Thanks very much, and thanks for coming early with a blue sky. Let me just say right up front, Hannesen is coming at things more from the formal reconstruction side. I am coming at things very much from the describing the natural phenomenon of human languages. And so for just terminology purposes for today, take a language to be anything that connects interpretations of some kind with signals of some kind, and then I want to focus on these things I'll just call slangs, the spoken or signed languages that human children naturally acquire. These slangs, spoken English, Italian, French, American Sign Language, they connect meanings with pronunciations. For purposes of take the meanings to be whatever they are that expressions of a language like spoken English connect with pronunciation. Roughly what I mean by that. So a famous kind of example, the duck is ready to eat, is ambiguous. It can mean either the duck is ready to dine or the duck is ready for us to eat it. That's a case of one pronunciation, two meanings, whereas the duck is eager to eat means only that the duck is eager to do the eating. Can't be understood as that he's eager to be eaten, whereas the duck is easy to eat goes the other way. That's what I mean by meanings. The duck is ready to eat has two of them, and the duck is eager to eat and the duck is easy to eat has one of them. If you want to do this at the level of lexical items, a prototypical example of homonymy like bank has many meanings. That's what I mean by meaning, and that'll do for today. Davidson's conjecture in the famous paper using this now terminological notion slang was that for every one of these, there's a truth theory that's the core of an adequate theory of meaning for that slang. To which Michael Dummett raised my favorite questions in philosophy of language. Can you please tell me what a theory of meaning is? What is this a theory of? What are you trying to describe and explain? I hated Dummett's question. And I think about this question, what are we trying to explain, in light of facts that Chomsky and others pointed out that I started out with, that for the slangs, that is the natural phenomena, not the languages we invent, we're not talking about B languages, but for the languages that human children acquire, there are interesting limits on how they connect meanings with pronunciation. So again, the duck is ready to eat two, the duck is easy to eat one, the duck is eager to eat one. Those are the kind of facts that make me feel like there's a natural kind in the vicinity. There's something that human children do. They acquire these languages of a very particular sort, identifying pronunciations, whatever they are, as the relevant signals, and these things' meanings, whatever they are, as the relevant interpretations. This is a natural biological phenomenon. It's not up to us to say, I'd really wish it worked otherwise so it would fit my favorite logical model. There's a phenomena there that we're after. And I take Dummett's questions to be a way of focusing in on that. When you're giving a theory of meaning, when you're trying to characterize these, whatever they are, that the children connect with pronunciations, what is that theory you're giving it a theory of, and what are you trying to describe and explain when you're doing that? Dummett's suggestion, and Chomsky's, and my teacher Jim Higginbotham's, and many other people, and mine, is that a theory of meaning is a theory of understanding. The target phenomena, central phenomena, is the phenomenon of how human beings understand expressions of their language. How that's related to other things is all up for grabs, but the target phenomena is a partial theory of the linguistic competence that human beings have acquired, and it's an attempt to say how it is you can understand an expression as, say, having one meaning as opposed to two but not three, or whatever. If you take that idea seriously, one thing you immediately agree, it seems uncontroversial, is a theory of understanding, and a theory of that target phenomena is not a theory of truth. If you want to study truth, we know how to go about doing that, and that's not studying understanding. But you can advance, and this is how I understand Davidson's bold conjecture, you can adopt the hypothesis that in giving a theory of understanding, a theory of meaning for a slang, say spoken English, spoken Italian, American Sign Language, in giving a theory of understanding for one of those languages, you might offer a truth theory, that is, a Tarski-style theory whose theorems specify truth conditions for the declarative sense. Of course, you have to do way more than that. You'd have to offer the truth theory and jazz it up in various ways, say, as Dummett put it, with a theory of force, and say something about, and what does truth have to do with meaning? But I understand Davidson's conjecture not as saying somehow the target phenomena is truth, but rather the proposal that in giving a theory of understanding for a slang, the way to do it is by embedding a truth theory in some other assumptions. Now, as people immediately pointed out, Davidson himself, it's actually pretty bold to posit truth theories for slangs, right? Everybody in the room knows Tarski said, don't try this at home. It's very bold to posit them as the core components of meaning theories for slangs. So for today, since our topic is foundational issues, I don't want to get caught up in the weeds. Let's bracket very many concerns about the very bold conjecture. Namely, you can give truth theories for slangs and that they'll serve as theories of meanings. There's a book that's just come out called Conjoining Meanings, where I go through a whole bunch of worries, some of which were nicely summarized in Liz's talk yesterday. And I want to bracket all of those. All of the usual things people worry about with regard to the very bold conjecture these days, I'm going to say, yeah, those are details. Let's set those. I find it very hard to set them aside. I love stacking up objections to the very bold conjecture, but I want to focus on today a pair of very old concerns, which I think cut to a central issue about what was problematic about the very bold conjecture. This was understood in the mid-70s, and I think the discussion just stopped. And what I basically want to do is invite you to go back in the Wayback Machine and think about what the very bold conjecture looked like about 1975, because with regard to this central problem, I don't think things have gotten any better. And the pair of old concerns is, one, can you actually have truth theories for languages that let you generate sentences like 1, the first numbered sentence in this talk, is not true? Or the simpler 2, my favorite sentence is not true. And as you might guess, 2 is indeed my favorite sentence of English. If you've got a language that lets you do that, can you actually give a truth theory for the language? And again, that was the thing Tarski said, don't try this at home. John Foster, alas, I cannot find a picture of John Foster on the web. John Foster pointed out that, look, truth seems to be one thing, meaning another. And truth preserves certain transitions that meaning seems not to preserve. So for example, like if you say snow is white is true if and only if snow is white, to take Davidson's favorite example, well, then you might have thought snow is white is equally true if and only if, now plunk in any truth you like on the right-hand side. And so Foster asked the question, how are you supposed to actually get a theory of meaning out of a theory of truth? Because while you might think that replacing is true and only if with means that in 3 doesn't do so bad, replacing is true and only if with means that in 4 looks like a complete disaster. So what is this? And I think when you teach this stuff to students, you sort of beat out of them their inclination to say, you're kidding, right? And what I want to suggest is, you're kidding, right? And I think we need to recover the you're kidding, right? And not pretend that this question was ever addressed adequately. The other thing I want to do in the talk today is to say that these are really two sides of the same problem. It took me a very long time to see this, but I believe that the Tarski liar problem concerning liars, not the Tarski, but the problem that concerning liar sentence and the Foster problem can be seen as two sides of the same fundamental problem for truth theoretic semantics. And if you want a slogan version of my view, it's just truth is representational neutral in the way that meaning isn't. And if that's true, how are you going to squeeze a theory of meaning out of a theory of truth? So I'll give you the whole talk up front, and then if I run out of time, you'll at least have gotten the punchline. If a slang sentence, again, a sentence of these languages that are naturally acquired, right? So we're talking about sentences of a language that gets acquired by a natural biological process, not languages that we get to invent and state the ground rules for. Davidson says there's a theory of truth for those, and so here's just, I think, a fact. If a slang sentence has the true theoretic property ascribed by one Davidsonian T-sentence, then given some other truths, having nothing to do especially with meaning, then S is going to end up having true theoretic properties ascribed by other T-sentences. That's one way of seeing what the Foster issue is. But now, here's the liar side of this. In some cases, it looks like if, conditional, if S has the Davidsonian property ascribed to it, then S is going to have properties that are logically incompatible. When I was in graduate school, I was taught that was the form of a reductio. If something, then contradiction, then probably not the something. And so if you take the first numbered sentence is not true, prima facie, Davidsonian theory of truth meanings for English is going to imply theorems of the sort 1a. The details will vary on how you spell it out, but you're going to end up having to say something like, relative to any context C, sentence 1 is true just in case the first numbered sentence in that context is not true. And that's sort of what you want, because sentence 1 can be used to say all sorts of true things. If I point at a sentence, 2 plus 2 is 4, and that was the first numbered sentence, then the first numbered sentence is indeed true. The problem only arises if the first numbered sentence happens to be 1. So if you say relative to the actual context C star, this very context, well, sentence 1 is true if and only if the first numbered sentence in the actual context is true. That's just a straight consequence of 1a. Alas, 1 is the first numbered context in the actual context, so conclusion, 1 is true if and only if it's not true. Now, I don't think that's a paradox. That's showing you that 1a is false. It's a real testament to the rhetorical power of truth-theoretic semantics that when you offer what seem to be reductios of the proposal, people say, oh, that's a paradox. Right? I assure you, I spent half of my life in the linguistics department for the last 20 years. You don't get to do this in the theory of syntax. In the theory of syntax, when you write down assumptions and they turn out to lead to contradiction, you say, well, that's a deep paradox. Well, it's a fascinating thing. I wonder how we're going to get out of this, right? You say, let's try a new theory. And I actually think it's about that simple with regard to truth-theoretic semantics, right? We can sort of see that it's false, and we should try a new theory. If that was the only problem in town, though, you might say, well, look, everybody's got their problems, and we'll deal with it tomorrow. But again, there's the Foster problem saying, how are you going to actually squeeze a theory of meaning out of a theory of truth after all? Because set aside liar sentence. Actually looks plausible as a theory of meaning. There are going to be endlessly many equally true truth theories that look disastrous as theories of meaning. So if you've got your T sentence, snow is white if it's true, if only if snow is white, if you made that follow from your preferred theory, then Foster pointed out, but look, I'm going to give you another theory, and we'll see details a little bit on, where you're going to be able to exploit the fact that snow is white if and only if, plug in your favorite truth on the right side, as true if snow is white, and now you're going to be able to derive out that snow is white if it's true if and only if your favorite fact. And you don't want to say that 4 is a good way of specifying the meaning of snow is white. And if 4 ain't a good way of specifying it, the meaning, what makes 3 such a hot way of specifying the meaning, right? Don't get distracted by the fact that you've used the same orthography on the left and right. Tell me in virtue of what one true T sentence is meaning specifying, where another true T sentence is, oh, no, 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 we don't want that. And Foster's challenge was, tell me the difference. That is, Davidsonians need to say how a truth theory of the right sort, as Davidson put it, could ever be the core of a good theory of meaning for slang. Now here's where the rest of the talk is going to go. I'm going to start by talking about Foster's problem and tell you what the standard replies were in the 70s and the 80s. And to the best of my knowledge, nobody's come up with a better kind of reply. And they basically involve what are called appealing to Spore Axioms and canonical derivations. So you basically say there's a privileged proof procedure that derives the good T sentences and doesn't derive the bad but true T sentences. And the retort is going to be, tell me again what the role of truth in the theory of meaning is if you're putting all the weight on canonical derivation. But, and this is the interest of connecting with the liar, will hardly need to remind people in this room that the standard replies to the liar involve positing some pretty sophisticated axioms and clever rules to keep you from deriving the contradictions. And so if in fact you think you can simultaneously provide a theory of truth for spoken English and have a theory be a theory of meaning, then I think you're basically saying, it turns out, if only we did it right, there will be axioms that be spare and the derivations of a canonical form that yield just the right T sentences, and it'll solve the liar problem at the same time. And I just don't see that that's in the cards. But I'm not saying anything new. I think this was understood in 1975, and we forgot about it. And the moral is going to be, again, something I think was understood in 1975. It's a little hard to see how a plausible hypothesis about how expressions are truth theoretically related to the world, truth theoretically, representation neutral, right? It's truth. How that hypothesis about how the expressions are related to the world, Tarski style, could do double duty as a plausible hypothesis about how expressions are understood. And here I think it's worth remembering, Tarski thought of the theory of truth as something you added to like a theory of arithmetic, and you like wanted to extend your, so for Tarski it wasn't, there is no problem, Foster's problem for Tarski. Tarski's not like trying to give you a theory of meaning for the language of arithmetic. He's just trying to like tell you which things are true in a language so he can go on to do some other stuff. Davidson had the really, really bold idea that you would give the theory of truth and it would do double duty as a theory of meaning. And if that's right, you want to see, well, tell me how you're going to deal with liar sentences and tell me how you're going to deal with Foster's problem. And don't tell me how you're going to deal with liar sentences on Monday by appealing to very sophisticated axioms and rules, and tell me on Wednesday how you're going to deal with Foster's problem by insisting on super simple axioms and a canonical derivation procedure that's going to generate the liar paradox like that, and then tell me on Friday that you solved the problem. That, in my view, is where we are in philosophy of language when we bracket bold conjecture. So it's not like I think this is the only right. I'm agreeing to set aside all the worries about specific constructions and just look at the core idea. And I think the core idea stinks in a way that was understood in 1975. But it was a bold conjecture. And we think, well, let's try it out. And I think 50 years later, no progress. That seems bad. Okay. Foster's problem. If you know how to, you go about writing down one of these Davidsonian theories, you'll know you write down axioms like for a verb, like verbs like walk and talk, for names like Ernie and Bert, and then you have some sort of rule that tells you, well, what happens when you stick a name and a verb together, and you might say, for example, the whole thing comes out true just in case there's an object in the domain that the name is true of and the verb is true of at the same time. And then you can derive that the sentence Ernie walks is true just in case there's some object X in the domain, which is Ernie, and that object walks. Suppressing all the complexities like tense and event variables and polysemy and genericity, right? Again, we're setting aside all the detailed worries about, could you actually do this in tail? Like, no, we'll assume there are no worries of detail to be had. And likewise for Bert talks, and you get parallel theorems for Bert walks and Ernie talks. Here was Foster's point. For any theory that lets you derive the wanted T-sentences, Ernie talks, if and only if Ernie talks, there's going to be other theories where you say, well, look, how about an axiom A1 star, where I say, for any object X, walks applies to it just in case X walks, and some stray truth T. It's equally true, but intuitively not meaning specifying, especially if T happens to be something like e to the ix equals 1, or any other truth. But the point is, it's equally true. And Foster's point was, tell me what the difference is between the axioms that are true and meaning specifying versus the ones that are just true. And if you give yourself axiom A1, then you can derive out a stray T theorem that has got the unwanted truth in it. Of course, you could have done it on the axiom for the name as well, or you could do it on the axiom for the combinatorial rule. So Foster's problem was basically saying to Davidson, you give me what theory of truth you think is the theory of truth that's going to serve as a theory of meaning. I will send you back by return mail a trivially different truth theory that is equally true and yet generates all these unwanted theorems. Please tell me the difference between your theory and mine, and please don't tell me, yes, but mine is mine, right?
You keep relating to these mathematical sentences true, but it's not true. It follows from the axioms of arithmetic or analysis.
Put in whatever sentence you'd like. It's true. And if you don't think any sentences are true, then you're not a Davidsonian. That's a hypothesis about the mathematical sentences, but I don't want to argue about it. Plug in whatever sentence on the right you think is true. For many of us, sentences of mathematics are the paradigms, but I don't want to argue about the philosophy of mathematics today. Let T be a theorem of some true theory, in fact. In fact, let T be a theorem of the very theory regarding English you were writing down. So let it, for example, be the theorem that Ernie walks is true if and only if Ernie walks. Your own theory has delivered that as a theorem, so you as the theorist are not in any position to say it's not true, and you'll be able to derive that out. So the point is, there are going to be, for any allegedly true truth theory, Foster says there are endlessly many equally true truth theories that look like they're not going to serve well as theories of meaning. Reply. Reply from Davidson initially, and then best version I know in the 1980s, the Larson and Siegel textbook. What you want to say to avoid the Foster's problem on this response view is to say, look, two conditions. Your axioms have to be spare. It's just a fact that the shorter axiom is privileged over the longer one. So yes, the one that's got the extra truth and the ampersand in there is true, but there's an asymmetric relation here. There's a simpler one that's equally true. Go for the simpler one. That's at the level of axioms. And at the level of derivations, keep your derivations not allowing any kind of logical omniscience. No, you've just got set kinds of derivational patterns you get to use, and they're very, very simplistic. So no fair, for example, doing theorem introduction. That is, the logic, background logic, ain't the logic. It's just basically extracting in the simplest possible way information from the axioms, and so you don't even get to do anything like theorem introduction, much less anything more interesting than that. So in fact, you can't even simplify to say walks Ernie, right? You're going to have to just live with whatever the right-hand side delivers you at the early stages of the derivation. And then you say, if it's derivable that S is true if and only if P, it follows that S means that P. So what licenses the apparent illicit replacement of true if and only if with means that? It's the fact that the true and if and only if claim was derivable from a system that included spare axioms, and where the derivation procedure was canonical in the sense of being a very, very highly restricted system that doesn't even allow theorem introduction. And then you get to say that Ernie walks means that. This idea of spare axioms. It turned out, well, when we said spare, what we meant was meaning specifying. So to say that Venus is true of Venus, yep. But to say that Hesperus is true of phosphorus, no, you can't allow that. Because if you allow that as an axiom, even if it's true, you'll get theorems that are not meaning specifying. Ruling that out, X is true of Hesperus applies to X just in case X is Hesperus and Hesperus equals phosphorus. That was the thing you were supposed to be eliminating via the spareness requirement. You just threw in an extraneous truth. But it turned out, actually, when you think about it, actually you also got to rule out all sorts of axioms that look equally spare. For example, for those of you that are not the native speakers in English, we have many words for groundhogs, these funny animals around. You can call them groundhogs, woodchucks, or whistle pigs, depending on what part of the country you're in. So it's a Hesperus-Prosperous problem with little animals running around. All those have to be ruled out. So John McDowell and Gareth Evans said things like, well, the axioms don't have to just be spare. They have to show the sense. Now, when people start talking about showing senses, just reach for your wallet, right? That is, it's a way of saying what we really meant was the axioms have to be meaning specifying. So, okay, now the bold conjecture is, so long as the axioms are meaning, but now truth isn't playing a role. What you're saying is the axioms have to be meaning specifying. Okay. Spare axioms. Let's do it for and. So everybody in this room will know what you can say with an ampersand, you can say with enough purse daggers if you stack them up. There's the sort of thing Davidson would not have wanted to say, that a sentence of the form alpha and beta is true just in case, now breathe deeply. Alpha, dagger, beta, beta. Right? And the thought was, well, yeah, that's not specifying the sense of the word and. But that is to say, you're not specifying the meaning of the ampersand or the word and by just giving its truth table. What you're saying is, I feel that the atomic ampersand is a better specifier of the meaning of the word and than the non-atomic expression P, dagger, Q, which I feel too. But to have that feeling is to have the feeling that in specifying the meaning, you're not doing it in terms of the truth theoretic notion of the truth table. And the Ernie walks and Bert talks means that you can bite the bullet, but that's what the bold conjecture actually requires, biting the bullet. The Ernie walks and Bert talks means that just as surely as it means the logically equivalent thing that means that with replacing this with the logically equivalent thing with ampersands. So if you think about like what had to just get ruled out with regard to axioms, it wasn't so much spareness that was issue. It's, look, you got to just rule out axioms that aren't meaning specifying. Then you got to have these tight canonical derivation procedures. And I really do recommend, if you haven't looked, Larson and Siegel's textbook is the only place I know where this is really worked out in full detail, where you can actually see what the derivation procedures would look like. And you basically get a rule that lets you do axiom instantiation, a rule that lets you replace proven equivalence, and that's about it. Right? Now, again, if it was just Foster's problem, if we knew we could give theories of truth for slangs, and the only issue was exactly how to say the right ones, that I think would be a real problem, but maybe not fatal. What I think is just the fatal difficulty is that now when you think, well, wait, that's the difficulty assuming you can give theories of truth for the language. So actually, no, I shouldn't skip over this. Let me just say one more thing about the kind of axioms you need. If you've ever taught truth theoretic semantics to undergraduates, you will know that when you tell them about relative clauses, they just, right? It's really hard to specify under what conditions an object X satisfies what Bert saw. You got to do all this stuff. Do a derivation that lets you say, dum, 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 dum. Oh yeah, and actually what Bert saw applies to X just in case there's some event prior to the time of the context as an event of Bert seeing X. And your derivation actually runs through all these steps involving sequence variants, and then you make it all go away. Or if you use the lambda calculus, you pack them, making it all go away right into the lambda calculus. And there's really this question, is that count as a canonical derivation? I can assure you the undergraduates do not feel that this is a meaning specifying derivation. And maybe it is, but then notice a notion of meaning specifying derivation has become a highly technical notion. Find out what counts. You might ask at this stage, what exactly is the difference between the canonical derivation strategy and the axioms have to be Sensy and an old style view which would have just said, here's what the meaning of expression is. It's something like the concept you express with the word, right? That was the thing David Lewis went ballistic about and said, you know, Fodor and Katz couldn't be allowed in the room, and Davidson wanted no part of that. But if to defend the Davidson conjecture, you end up having to saying the axioms have to be Sensy. You want to know what's the difference between that and saying, look, the name Hesperus just ain't the name for the concept phosphorus. It's the name for the concept Hesperus. And if you have a complicated name like France, well, okay, there's a couple of concepts back there. And you know, those of you know about the Chomsky on London and Londra know where this is heading. And you might say, well, look, if I had a sentence like France is hexagonal, what you got to do is say, that's some kind of instruction for how to build a concept. Please replace the France name with a concept. And I prefer it not to be the concept of the polis if I'm using the predicate hexagonal. And if I'm using the predicate hexagonal, I'd really rather right, have it be about the place. I don't want to give you my worry about trying to give you a book that's just come out basically would say at this point, look, actually, the Davidsonian stuff is no better, and in fact, worse than just saying meanings or instructions for how to build up concepts. Everything you thought you were doing in the truth theory, let's reconstruct that as recipes for how to build mental representations, because you're saying the axioms have to be Sensy anyway. Let's just admit this is a theory of mental representation, right? That's just to tell you there is a published alternative in the offing. what I want to do is, in the time remaining, is just go back to the second side of what the major problem was, which was that given the nature of truth, it looks like if a sentence has a Davidsonian property, it's going to have properties that are logically incompatible. And together with the Foster's problem, here's another way of stating the punchline of the talk. If you're a Davidsonian, I think you need a background logic for deriving your theorems that has the following magical collection of yield contradictions given liar sentences, and yet it's dumb enough to not generate theorems that trigger Foster's problem, right? You think about what Foster's problem says, your derivation procedures have to be really dumb. No like sneaking a peek at other stuff you know. And that's hard to square with dealing with the liar for reasons I think they're going to be familiar to this audience, but it's worth just going through them even though they're familiar. So here's the example involving the first numbered sentence is not true again. Ask yourself, how are you as a Davidsonian going to deal with that sentence, which looks like it's got the same grammatical structure as the first frog in the line is not blue? So, well, that's all right. The whole thing is true relative to a context, just in case the first numbered sentence is not true. But then, given the fact about the actual context, you apparently get a contradiction, right? Or let's not worry about this. Take the sentence, my favorite sentence is not true. There's nothing paradoxical about that sentence. It can be used to say true thing, so long as, in fact, you can use it to say a true thing so long as your favorite sentence is not true. It just so happens that for me, 2 is my favorite sentence. That's just a fact about the current context. I'm the speaker, and that's my favorite sentence. And so the Davidsonian theory says, I know how to deal with that sentence. It's true relative to any context, just in case the favorite sentence of the speaker is not true. Right? Any Davidsonian theory is going to have a consequence like that regarding 2. But now that means even though I'm the speaker, that general truth is about the sentence applies. So even for me, sentence 2 is true just in case the favorite sentence of the speaker is not true, but I'm the speaker. There's just a fact. Now we get a contradiction. And again, I don't think that's a paradox. What it is a fact together with an immediate consequence of the theory yielding a contradiction. When a theory has an immediate consequence that together with a known fact yields a contradiction, that's very often taken to be a sign that the theory is false. And I think it's that simple. And if you want to avoid it as a Davidsonian, you have to front up with a way of avoiding the immediate consequence or somehow showing that my favorite sentence is not sentence 2. But that's going to be really hard to do. Everybody in this room will know that Parsons and Kripke pointed out that the problem of liar sentences is pervasive. So it can't be confined to a certain grammatical class of expressions. Take sentence 6. Most of the sentences in there, and I'm pointing to a certain box, are not true. And now take the sentence, most of the sentences in boxy, where boxy turns out to be a name for a box, that very box that I'm pointing at, are not true. Given the Davidsonian conjecture, sentence 6 is true just in case most of the sentences in the thing pointed at are not true. And 7 is true if and only if most of the sentences in the named box, boxy, are not true. That's the conjecture. Kripke now points out, well, let's imagine that in the actual context C, I should have brought my prop and had the box, but you can imagine it. The thing demonstrated there is a box that contains 9 sentences, 4 of which are true, and if we don't like 1 equals 1, plug in your favorite true sentence, 4 false ones, and then sentence 7 itself, most of the sentences in boxy are not true. So given D, that is given a conjecture about a natural phenomenon, given that conjecture, sentence true is true, 6 is true if and only if 7 isn't true. That's a consequence of the theory. Now, of course, here's just the fact about the actual context. The thing named boxy is the box pointed at. So now it also follows from the theory that 6 is true if and only if 7 is true, right? So in this strange circumstance, the theory has 2 consequences. Consequence 1, 6 is true if and only if 7 is not true. Consequence 2, 6 is true if and only if 7 is true. But the strange consequence is there. We can create it. And so, right, you have to create the strange consequence to see if the theory is false, but that's not an unheard of thing in science. You consider the implications of a theory for situations you hadn't thought of before, and then you notice that, oh no, the theory looks bad. Again, I don't think it's a paradox. I'm not saying there aren't paradoxes about truth. When you try to state truths about truths clearly in an invented language, it turns out to be really, really hard. I understand that. But that fact does not license us in saying, oh, thank God, thinking about truth is really, really hard, therefore we get to say whatever we like about truth in relation to slang. You can still end up saying some really false things about spoken English, even though thinking about truth is hard. Thinking about truth is hard is not a license to say whatever you like about how truth is related to meanings. Look, you can hypothesize that the adjective blue in English is a nice, simple adjective whose semantics can be given in a straightforward way, but that true doesn't work like that. You can have that as a hypothesis, and then plug in your favorite proposal about how to deal with truth. I tend to like crypty-style hierarchies with fixed points, but people can take their preferences. But here's the question. Whatever you want to now plug in as your axioms concerning the word true in English, wheeling in crypty or group de Belknap or whatever you want to wheel in, why think the resulting axioms and rules for deriving theorems are going to be suitably Sensy? I mean, when I see the things that, if you read Tim Maudlin's recent book, a quite illuminating book on the liar paradox, and look at the kind of things he ends up saying about true, I'm totally happy to think that maybe that's the right way to think about the predicate true in an invented language, but it doesn't feel like I've been told anything sensy and meaning specifying about the English word true, and I don't think Tim thinks that either. So if you're going to wheel in off-the-shelf technology from philosophical logic and say, oh, that's the way the word true works in English, then if you're a Davidsonian, you got to be prepared to say, oh no, I'm specifying my axioms still in a Sensy, Foster responsive way. And at this point, it is sort of important to remember that the adjective true that appears in English and lots of other languages is not a sentential operator like the thumbs up operator. It's like an adjective. It combines with a copular form of the verb to be to form verb phrases. And in fact, in natural languages, not even not is a sentential operator. So if in fact you think actually the way to deal with the paradoxes concerning truth is to invent a language in which true and negation are sentential operators and then do, for example, the crypty fixed point strategy, that may be right. Maybe that's the right way to think about truth. But then the question is, what on earth does that have to do with a theory of meaning or theory of understanding for a slang that a typical human child can acquire? Again, if you're doing the reconstruction project, no problem. However, if you're doing the descriptive project of describing spoken English as we have it, problem. So here's just another way of putting it, the point. Even if you say true ain't like blue, you still got to say something about what's going on with phrases of the form is true, and noun phrases of the form adjective noun, because you can have true as the adjective in expressions like true sentence. So whatever you want to say as a Davidsonian, you've got to say something about sentences in which these kind of predicates appear. And if your strategy with regard to truth is to say, treat truth and negation as sentential operators, fine, but now the question is, and what about in a language where the pronunciation true gets paired with something that ain't a sentential operator? How much time do I have? I think I really want to leave time for questions. So what I want to do is just tell you that out there in the literature, there were a couple of radical replies, and I'll discuss them if you want, but I don't want to discuss them if you don't want. And one is to say, oh, don't worry about liars. A truth theory for a fragment of a slang would be good enough. And what we're going to do is not give a theory of truth for English. We're going to give a theory of truth for English minus. And English minus turns out to not have the problematic expressions. That's one radical reply. I just don't buy it for a minute. But we can talk about why. Even more radical reply that my friend Ernie Lepore, together with Kirk Ludwig, has tried, and various people are trying these days, is Whoever said a truth theory for English had to be true? Let's just let the theory be false. That's a really radical reply, but I'm happy to talk about that as well. So I don't want to leave you with the impression that nobody's said anything. However, if you look at the literature since 1975, I think you find a striking phenomena. Like, from 67 to 75, there was some quite intensive discussion of the foundational issues that I've talked about today. And in the 80s, people like Chris Peacock and Gareth Evans and Martin Davies really, really worried about what to do with the problem of extensionally equivalent truth theories. Yeah, this is almost the last slide now. And then Kirk and Ernie in their books worried about, there's Larson and Siegel. But apart from that, there's not been a lot of discussion of these issues lately, and I will ask you, those you know the really literature, roll through your head and ask how many people have discussed the liar's problem and Foster's problem in the same paper and said, these are the two central problems that we knew about in 1975. Here's how Davidsonian deals with both of them at the same time. I think that's a gap in the literature that needs to be filled. Davidsonians need to front up and say how they're going to, and I've been talking about Davidsonians, but if you learned your semantics from Hyman Kratzer, you'll notice there was no discussion of the Foster problem in there. In fact, in my experience, when I talk to linguists, they say, Foster problem, what's that? So if you're thinking, surely somebody dealt with this, like maybe there's a paper out there that I don't know about, but my impression is that the Foster problem, so yeah, something about canonical derivation procedure will work. You know, liar practice, yeah, there's something like cryptic fixed points will work. Doing it both at the same time, not so obvious. And I think I was very happy to get the invitation to this conference because, you know, if we're going to think about the philosophical foundations of semantics, you don't get much more foundational than this kind of stuff. And I think we would actually do well to just go back and think about how things looked in 1975 and ask, what was the right move to make then? Davidson offers the conjecture. Dummett asks, I think, the right question. I'm inclined to draw the conclusion that a theory of understanding is not going to be truth theoretic, but that's my particular conclusion about this. The main thing I just want to stress today is there is a problem at the heart of truth conditional semantics that has not yet been adequately addressed. So let's not confuse theories of how expressions are understood with theories of what it is for uses of sentences to be true. Those are just different things. If you think they're related in an interesting way, you got to front up with a defensible hypothesis. And I would say, when I got my internalist hat on, let's admit that externalist constraints on truth reference are not obviously constraints about meaning on meaning understanding, because we just don't know how truth is related to meaning. And the thought that we do know is, I think, just a myth. Thanks.